Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something really fascinating. We're looking at this idea of the unbroken brain. The brain's incredible ability to change, even after addiction, and how it connects with, well, the very practical wisdom of the 12 steps.
Yeah, the sources you sent over are quite something. We've got neuroscience talking about the real physical impact of chronic substance use right next to the foundational texts of recovery.
Exactly. Texts showing how people, through what seem like simple daily actions, can actually trigger this huge neurological and psychological shift. It's quite a juxtaposition.
It really is. And our focus, I think, is to unpack how the 12 steps, this sort of spiritual framework, can function almost like a long-term protocol for encouraging neuroplasticity, for healing the brain.
So we're exploring that paradox, how the brain, which got kind of rewired the wrong way by addiction, seeing it as a learning disorder, actually needs this act of surrender, of letting go to gain real control and heal itself.
Precisely. It's like hitting the reset button, but it requires letting go of the driver's seat first.
We're talking about fundamentally changing how the mind operates. We've got the sources to look at the chemistry behind craving, why hitting that emotional bottom seems so necessary, and then the actual nuts and bolts of the recovery program itself, how it builds a whole new way of being. So where should we start? Maybe under the hood. What's actually happening when the brain learns wrong in addiction?
Okay, yeah. So when we discuss addiction now, it's really important to move past old ideas of it being just a moral failing. The sources are clear. It's much better understood as a disorder of learning and motivation.
Right.
And often the roots are there long before someone even tries a drug or takes a drink. It's about how people learn to cope, or maybe not cope, with distress, how they frame their world.
So it's not simply about exposure then, because lots of people try substances, but relatively few become addicted. The difference is the internal payoff.
Exactly. It's the learned association. The brain figures out, hey, this substance, it works. It quickly shuts down that awful feeling, whether that's loneliness, insecurity, anxiety, you name it. It's learned relief.
And the brain, always looking out for survival, essentially flags that relief as incredibly important.
Critically important. So if you see addiction as this learning disorder, what happens is the brain's whole priority system gets, well, hijacked. It's not that choice disappears completely, but the internal ranking of needs goes haywire. Getting the substance starts to feel as vital as finding food or water.
So the person is still making choices, technically, but from a completely skewed perspective.
From a corrupted set of priorities, yeah. Driven by this underlying neurochemistry.
It brings us to dopamine. We hear that word all the time with addiction. Can you break down its role? Because it's not just about feeling good, is it?
That's a really key point. It's not the pleasure chemical. Dopamine is the chemical of wanting, of motivation, of saying, pay attention. This is important for survival. It operates in the midbrain, a very old part of our brain focused on keeping us alive.
Okay.
Now, normally, say you eat something delicious, dopamine goes up a bit. It keys you, good, do that again. But substances like alcohol or heroin or cocaine, they're like cheats. They flood the system with dopamine, maybe 2 to 10 times the normal level from natural rewards.
Wow.
And that massive surge sends this overwhelming mistaken signal. This is the most important thing you've ever done for survival.
And that false signal is what starts programming the repetition, but something has to make that lesson stick, right? Physically lock it in.
Right. And that's where glutamate enters the picture. Glutamate is the brain's main go signal, the primary excitatory neurotransmitter. It's essential for forming memories, especially these really strong salient ones linked to survival. So when that huge drug-induced dopamine wave hits, glutamate is released too. Its job is basically to stamp the memory of the event. Remember this feeling. Remember what you did. This chemical 1-2 punch, intense wanting, reinforced by immediate memory coding, physically wires the brain to seek out the substance again and again.
Creating that obsession.
Creating the mental obsession, that intense drive that characterizes addiction. It's a learned, chemically reinforced pathway.
So with that constant, powerful, yet false survival signal firing, it's no wonder that long-term use leads to actual physical changes in the brain, not just psychological dependence. What kind of damage do the sources point to?
The structural changes can be pretty significant, and they're measurable. Chronic use, particularly with substances like alcohol over long periods, is linked to reduced gray matter density in the cerebral cortex.
Gray matter, that's where the nerve cell bodies are.
Exactly. So reduced density basically means fewer active nerve cells in those areas compared to normal. And often the amount of loss correlates with how long and how heavily someone used.
And functionally, where does this damage hit hardest?
The prefrontal cortex, or PFC, seems to take a major hit. That's our brain's CEO,
Hmm.
responsible for planning, impulse control, weighing consequences, rational thought.
Executive functions.
Right. Studies show that in brains affected by addiction, there's less energy being used in these PFC areas. The circuits just aren't firing efficiently. They're underperforming.
So the physical damage, fewer cells, less energy in the control center, directly mirrors the psychological symptoms we see.
Mhm.
Poor impulse control, difficulty thinking rationally, not connecting actions to future problems.
It's a perfect parallel. The physiological impairment lines up directly with the psychological struggles. And underneath it all, as you said earlier, is often this desperate drive to avoid pain.
That surcease from pain.
hmm Addiction becomes the go-to, albeit destructive, way to silence inner turmoil. The shame, the loneliness, the feeling of not being good enough. Avoiding that internal pain becomes the prime motivator, even if it creates utter chaos externally. That's why addressing the psychological mess is so crucial.
Okay, so that really sets the scene for recovery. If the brain is physically wired for this self-destructive pain avoidance loop, how does someone even start to break free? How does that initial decision, that moment of choosing recovery, ever overcome that powerful, learned survival drive?
Well, that's where we hit the central paradox of the 12 steps. The very first step isn't about willpower, it's about surrender. It demands this complete, often painful admission of defeat. Powerlessness.
Yeah, the big book and 12 steps and 12 traditions are really blunt about it. They say most people won't truly embrace the program until they've hit bottom. Why? Because the steps that follow require things like rigorous honesty, making amends, helping others, things that are just, well, unthinkable for someone still trapped in active addiction.
You have to reach a point where the pain of staying the same is greater than the perceived pain of changing. For many, that point only comes after losing almost everything: jobs, family, health, sometimes just their own sanity. That level of desperation becomes the motivator.
That admission of powerlessness in step one, it's described as the main taproot of the whole fellowship. It's tackling that double-edged sword head-on, the mental obsession, that insane urge, plus the physical allergy, the fact that one drink triggers the phenomenon of craving.
Right. Because willpower alone just isn't enough against that deeply ingrained, chemically reinforced drive. The brain needs something external, a different context, to start recalibrating its priorities.
Now, the sources talk about raising the bottom. Some people manage to stop before total devastation. Maybe they see the writing on the wall.
Yes, the high bottoms. But even for them, the core realization has to be the same. My way isn't working. I can't fix this on my own. That fundamental admission of powerlessness is still the key.
And this moment of hitting bottom, this acceptance of defeat, is described in almost spiritual language. Humiliation before resurrection. Pain as the touchstone of spiritual rebirth. It's powerful stuff.
From a neuroplasticity angle, you could see this profound emotional disruption hitting bottom as the necessary circuit breaker. It shatters the denial, the self-sufficiency the addicted brain relied on. And that brokenness, that crack in the ego, opens the door for steps 2 and 3.
Which introduce hope, the idea of a power greater than ourselves that could restore sanity.
Exactly. Believing that something bigger than your own messed up thinking can help.
But that's a huge hurdle for many, isn't it? The whole God thing, the sick ego resisting submission.
It is.
Yep.
And the program is actually incredibly pragmatic about this. It suggests defining that higher power in functional terms initially. It doesn't have to be a deity in the traditional sense. It's simply any power greater than your own self-will that has the ability to affect change.
Like the group itself.
For many, yes. The collective experience, the support, the shared wisdom of the AA group becomes that initial higher power. It's
Yeah.
something tangible that clearly has more power to keep people sober than their individual willpower did.
I remember a story in the sources about someone who considered themselves an atheist, but in a moment of pure despair, they cried out, "God, what am I going to do?" And the answer came through finding the fellowship. It defines the power by its results.
It's a functional definition.
Yeah.
And this act of surrender, step 3, turning your will and life over to the care of this chosen higher power. It's the foundation for psychological healing. It lets you stop trying to control everything, stop being ruled by external events, and start finding an own center.
A sense of inner stability.
Yes, realizing you're connected to something bigger. You might not control the world, but you can start to manage your response to it. And that's a massive step in rebuilding the self-regulation capacity that was damaged in the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, so once that fundamental surrender happens, the program shifts into, well, the real work, doesn't it? The practical steps that actually start to rewire those old destructive pathways. This is where the corrective learning really kicks in.
This is absolutely the active phase of creating new neural pathways through deliberate practice. It starts with the inventory steps, 4 and 5, taking stock and then sharing it.
Step 4, the fearless and moral inventory. The sources call this like holding up a critical mirror. For someone who's maybe lived in denial for years, this is often the first honest look at themselves, their patterns, their resentments, their fears.
It's designed to build self-awareness, honesty, and eventually self-respect. But just doing the inventory isn't enough. It can be terrifying. All that stuff you've kept hidden, the fear is overwhelming.
Which is why step 5 is crucial, admitting to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Sharing it.
Exactly. Sharing that inventory, usually with a sponsor or a trusted advisor, is key. When you voice those secrets, those shames, those fears, and the other person listens without judgment, accepts you, it starts to break the power of shame. You begin to see yourself more objectively, maybe even with a bit of compassion.
That objective view, maybe seeing yourself through their eyes for a moment, allows for self-acceptance.
Yes, and self-acceptance is critical for changing those ingrained thought patterns. The addicted mind is often consumed by what the sources call fear thought, just constant worry, anxiety, resentment loops that drain energy and cloud judgment.
Right.
By bringing fears and defects out into the open through step 5, you reduce their emotional charge. You remove some of that fear element, which then allows the rational parts of the brain, the PXE, to start functioning better again. Critical thinking becomes possible again.
It's like cleaning out the mental clutter so you can actually think straight. It sounds like a direct antidote to the psychological side of addiction.
It really is. And once that inventory work sheds light on the patterns, the character defects, we move into the steps focused on change and repair. Starting with step 6.
Became entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Readiness.
Yeah, and the sources emphasize that readiness, that willingness, can't be forced. It requires patience. Trusting that this higher power, however you understand it, is working to restore balance and wholeness. It's an acceptance that you don't have to fix everything overnight, but you do need to be willing.
And step 7 follows naturally. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So this is actively turning over those defects identified in step 4.
It's applying that humility learned in step 3 specifically to your character flaws. Instead of relying on substances or willpower to manage or suppress those flaws, you're asking for help in actually removing them, trusting a spiritual process over a chemical one.
Okay, and that internal work then leads outward to steps 8 and 9, dealing with the past, making amends.
Right. Step 8 is making a list of all persons we had harmed and becoming willing to make amends to them all. Step 9 is actually making those direct amends wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. This is about cleaning up the wreckage of the past.
That debris, if left untouched, can be a constant source of guilt, shame, and potential relapse triggers.
Definitely. But step 9 comes with a really important caution, as you noted from the sources.
Yeah, the amends need to be made with common sense and kindness. It's not about making yourself feel better at someone else's expense.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
The goal isn't just personal peace of mind if it causes more harm. The example often given is about amends to children.
Yeah.
A parent making overly dramatic confessions about their past drinking behavior might actually frighten or destabilize a child.
Right.
In that case, the amends might be more about consistently showing up now, being reliable, loving, stable. Actions, not necessarily a detailed, potentially harmful verbal account. It's about their healing, not just your own relief. Selfless amends, not selfish ones.
That distinction is huge. And this whole process, steps 4 through 9, represents a massive psychological shift. The sources have that comparison chart.
Yeah, it really highlights the transformation. Where addiction fostered delusion, step 1 pushes towards reality. Where there was shame, step 4 builds self-worth. Willfulness gives way to letting go in step 7. Self-suffering transforms into witnessing our path, often through service, by step 12.
It's a systematic rebuilding of the personality.
It truly is. And what's fascinating is how this aligns with the idea that our brains can change. The sources mention scientific views supporting this, that our entire structure, even physically, can be completely changed, made over, within less than 1 year, just through reforming our mental attitude.
Thoughts make us what we are.
Essentially, yes.
Mm.
The daily practice, the conscious effort to think and act differently, literally forges new neural pathways. It gives the prefrontal cortex the input and the space it needs to heal and function properly again.
Which perfectly sets up the maintenance steps 10 and 11. Daily discipline to keep the new pathways strong and prevent sliding back.
Exactly. Step 10 is the ongoing inventory, not a big yearly thing, but a spot check throughout the day. The moment you feel disturbed, angry, resentful, afraid, you check yourself. Where was I wrong? What was my part? And promptly admit it.
So it stops the emotional garbage from piling up again.
Precisely. Keeps the slate clean. And it's often paired with an end-of-day review, kind of a mental balance sheet. Where was I helpful? Where was I selfish? What could I do better tomorrow? It builds accountability.
And this constant self-monitoring and correction flows into step 11, prayer and meditation.
Yes, seeking through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him. It's about learning to focus, to quiet the mental chatter, not necessarily asking for stuff, but praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out.
Shifting from give me what I want to show me what to do.
That shift is profound. It moves you from constant striving and emotional turmoil, that internal chaos of the addicted mind, towards acceptance and serenity, finding guidance rather than demanding outcomes. This daily conscious practice is what truly solidifies the new, healthier brain wiring.
Hmm.
And the result of all this sustained work, it's described as a new kind of freedom, a completely different outlook on life than the narrow, self-obsessed focus of active addiction.
Right. The simple act of not picking up that first drink one day at a time, combined with these steps, starts to fundamentally change your attitude. That constant self-seeking drive just diminishes. It loses its power as these new, more outward-focused ways of thinking and acting get stronger.
And the sources talk about freedom having two sides. First, it's freedom from things from the slavery to alcohol or drugs, obviously, but also from crippling fear, fear of people, fear of financial insecurity, fear of the future. But it's also freedom to do things, freedom to choose sobriety daily, freedom to actually be yourself authentically, freedom to grow spiritually, to connect with others, to live a useful life.
The promises associated with working the steps really speak to this knowing serenity. Losing fear, not regretting the past, realizing self-seeking slips away. Peace of mind, which was what the substance falsely promised, becomes an actual internal state.
Exactly. That restless, irritable, discontented feeling starts to fade. You find that own center we talked about earlier. The chaos of the world is still there, but it doesn't have to dictate your internal state. You gain a sense of perspective, a connection to something stable within, regardless of external storms.
And this internal shift finds its expression, and maybe its reinforcement, through external action, step 12.
Yes. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. The theme is joy, but the key word is action.
It's not just about feeling better, it's about doing better. The spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it.
In carrying the message, helping another suffering alcoholic isn't presented as just charity. It's crucial for your own continued sobriety. We may lose what we have unless we give it away. The spiritual benefit has to flow through you to others.
That outward focus is the ultimate break from the self-absorption of addiction.
Completely.
Oh.
And it highlights the absolutely vital role of the community, the fellowship. The first tradition says our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity.
Every member relies on the group.
Yes, that collective strength, that shared experience provides support and accountability. It acts like a social prefrontal cortex, maybe,
Yeah.
helping individuals maintain perspective and make better choices.
And it reinforces humility. The sources stress that recovery rarely happens through professionals alone. The real power comes from alcoholics helping each other. We could do together what we could not do separately.
It forces a principles before personalities approach, putting the group's welfare, the common goal of sobriety, ahead of individual egos or ambitions. That humility is key to the whole system working.
It's an incredible design, really. Helping others becomes the best way to help yourself, embedding that service orientation as the final stage of rewiring, moving from self-centered escape to a life focused on responsibility and connection.
So wrapping it up, what we've really traced is this journey from, the brain's learning process being hijacked by dopamine and misplaced survival signals to a deliberate, spiritually informed process of corrective learning.
Seeing addiction through that unbroken brain lens as a problem of skewed priorities, not a permanently broken machine.
Exactly. And then seeing the 12 steps as this practical, action-oriented recipe to systematically reset those priorities. Surrender overcomes self-will, honesty replaces denial, service replaces self-seeking.
The neuroscience shows us that the brain can change, neuroplasticity is real, and the steps provide a clear protocol, a method grounded in spiritual principles to guide that change.
And perhaps one of the most hopeful things in the sources is that idea that significant change, even physical restructuring at some level, can happen relatively quickly, maybe less than a year, if the mental attitude and daily practices are consistent.
Our thoughts really do shape our reality, down to the neural level.
It seems so. Which leads us nicely into our final thought for you, the listener.
Right. If the brain isn't truly broken, if it has this capacity for profound change, and if we've outlined this very specific daily approach, especially steps 10 and 11, the ongoing inventory and connection, what's one small conscious practice you could start today?
Maybe it's implementing that spot check inventory when you feel upset, or taking just 2 minutes for quiet reflection, asking for guidance instead of listing demands. How can you begin right now to use these simple tools to quiet the noise, challenge the fear thought, and cultivate that internal power?
The tools are straightforward, but actually using them consistently, that's the radical part. Something to think about.